right, welcome back to the podcast. My guest this week is Maddie Stone, a security researcher in Google Project Zero. Maddie's focused a lot on tracking ODAs exploited in the wild recently. Prior to that, did some work on the Android team, doing mobile security research. Maddie, welcome to the show. Looking forward to a fun conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's start on the ODA year in review piece that you guys just published. You've been doing this tracking the discovery of ODA in the wild, not necessarily tracking all ODA in the wild, that's impossible, but tracking the discovery and documentation of ODA in the wild for the last 3 years. When you look at, right, you've done it for 19, 20, 21.
Yeah, so Project Zero has kept track since mid-2014, but I have been working on this program since
right, the specific tracking of the in the wild ODA for over the 3 years. Is there a one big trend that pops out to you from the last 3 years of data that tells you what?
Last 3 years, we're starting off tough here. Okay, if one
yeah,
thing
because I want to put the whole thing into context, right? And start to because the whole idea is to start collecting this data so we can start seeing patterns. Unless and this is like earliest stage. Even 3 years is early stage, right?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing we can take away is that I think there's more use of zero-day exploits than I think a lot of us in the industry wanted to talk about, and that the use of these zero-day exploits, or these zero-day exploits that are being used, are not quite as technically sophisticated as we all like to make them out to be. They're not this once in a lifetime, requires such extreme knowledge, expertise, and time to put in that actually it looks a lot like things we've seen in public. So I think that's really what we've seen thus far in the last 3 years.
But that tells us also that they don't need to, right? They don't need to be ultra sophisticated. The handful of sophisticated ones, there are a handful. You can count it on one hand. The ones that are really, really technically, the marvel at the technical brilliance of some of these things. But the fact that it's same old, what does that say about like just defense in general or the state of computing in your mind?
So I know, like, to jump in, it sounds like my answer would be of, this is really sad, we should be doing so much better, like what's going on? But I actually think there's a positive side of this, is that I would say when I started this work 3 years ago, most people would say, oh, we can't worry about zero days. There's nothing we can ever do to stop them, make it harder, have people use them less. But what the data is showing us is actually there's a lot of very clear things that if we put effort into it as an industry, we actually can make this much more difficult for attackers to be able to have these 0 days and use them less often. So I think knowing that, oh, this isn't this thing we've never seen before, studying attack surface that aren't even on our radars, it shows us, wait, actually, if we do put the investment into these types of solutions that, the industry has been talking about for years, it's very likely we will get a real return back on those types of efforts.
Let me seg to, you mentioned making ODA hard. Let me seg, that's kind of like the Google project mission mantra over the years. Our mission is to make ODA hard. And through this kind of sharing of research and pointing out where signs are. At the end of your blog post, you say, as an industry, we're not making ODA hard. So, I mean, you mentioned incremental improvement and things getting better, and you can see things getting better, but at the same time, ODA is not hard. The data shows it. How do you balance that in your mind?
Well, so yes, the Project Zero mission, since it was founded in mid-2014, is make zero-day hard.
What does that mean? Let's linger there for a second. What in your mind, what does that mean?
So I don't think there is one clear definition of what hard looks like. So what I'm actually really focused on is those incremental improvements of what does it mean to make it harder? Because I think those are things we can actually track and get behind versus this, one point in the future that, no one can super define right now. So what harder looks like to me is that whatever capabilities attackers want, that doesn't just mean 0 days. It takes them more effort. It's more costly for them to maintain, requires more expertise and resources. So an example of that is, like 5-10 years ago, you could pop a lot of desktop computers, or mobile phones without even using a zero day.
Right.
So, that's the first step, is that people could be hacked and owned without ever needing to use one of these zero-day exploits. So the fact now that in a lot of cases they're required, that is an incremental improvement in security. So then when we're talking making zero-day hard or harder, that looks like now today you don't just need one of those 0 days. Like to own, say, an Android device, you generally need 3 0 days chained together. So you can't just go and say, I found a 0-day vulnerability and I'm going to figure out how to exploit it. You now have to do that 3 times. So that's what, to me, makes 0-day harder means. It means that you can't plug and play and using the same exploit methodology and just put another vulnerability in it. It's every time one of your capabilities are caught, burned, patched, you have to start from scratch.
Right. So you're adding cost, adding resources, and just kind of raising the bar and raising the cost for the attackers. But at the same time, right, the state of play is if you go to Tianfu Cup or Pwn to Own, everything still gets owned, right? Every modern device still gets owned. I've been covering Pwn to Own for 10, 15 years. Charlie Miller used to show up and pop an iPhone with one single memory corruption bug. Today, those guys need 4 or 5. So your data, it's clear. It's clear that we've made it harder. Mm-hmm. But even at harder, we're still, I'm a cynic, right? So I'm going to, full disclosure, we're still nowhere near protecting ourselves. We have a ransomware epidemic. Everything seems to be owned at a time when, the security research community feels like we're moving the bar forward. And when I talk to CISOs and defenders, they feel helpless. So I'm trying to balance, like, where are we?
So, and I think that's sort of combining 2 different issues there. So ransomware, in a lot of cases, they're not even using 0
Correct.
days.
And that's my point.
That is a different level of security that most organizations, if you have not covered the bare minimum of, good security practices,
you'll get compromised.
Then probably focusing on 0-day exploits is not where your resources should go yet, because the whole goal is you want to make it as hard as possible for attackers to get into your systems. They shouldn't just be like, oh, well, they weren't that high value of a target, but it's easy peasy, so like, why not throw them into the bucket? That's sort of the goal of this 0 days hard. And when we look at, the known 0-day exploitation, and I don't think we know a lot of what's going on. I still think we only know a small percentage. In the scheme of things, it's not everyone is getting pwned with 0 days. And so in that sense, I think we need to sort of remember that, yes, someone will always find a way into devices. What we want it to be is that they've put in so many resources and it is so special, so precious, and so rare for them to have this capability that they use it with so much discretion that they don't get a lot of return out of it. They may only use it on their 1, 2, or 3 top targets versus, say in a watering hole where there's a good chance, some other people will stumble upon it, find it, and burn their 0 days. When we're seeing that sort of lackadaisical attitude of, I'm going to use these 0 days with discretion, that's a very clear indicator that, 0 day is absolutely not hard enough, and that we need to keep working on and focusing on this mission. But as we see things get more targeted, I think that's also an indicator that, like, okay, these are becoming more of a precious resource to attackers.
I remember all chatter of 0 day and O day. In the while, O day used to be the forte of nation state attackers, apex predators with unlimited resources. That has changed. Cyber criminals, ransomware guys, access brokers and all these subsets of the ransomware ecosystem are using ODay. Like ODay is now accessible to a larger, or maybe we're now visualizing it. Maybe it's always been accessible. But in a lot of the ODay reporting, it's no longer the forte of like apex predators. So the vulnerability seems to have filtered down. Is that fair?
So I don't actually know of last year, like many, if any. I think there might have been 1 or 2 that we believe were affiliated with ransomware.
But in
out of
fairness,
that,
you're
like
not
50,
covering all of
we were
them either. I mean, we should make that, we should kind of set the parameters around it. Your ODA spreadsheet only looks at things that Project Zero is interested in. Can you kind of help me explain the scope of your ODA thing?
Yeah, so the scope that we focus on, which is defined like we have a tracking spreadsheet so everyone can see the data that we're working off of, and do peer review and things like that, because more eyes and brains on this topic is better. But we have scoped it to largely the large consumer products, large geographically diverse products around the global. So we don't really include any IoT devices. We don't include Zeroday's like against WordPress plugins or
VPNs and Axelian and some. That's why I'm saying if your data is not showing crimeware groups using ODA, it's because maybe you're not looking at the places they're using ODA, which is on these VPNs and network appliances and that kind of thing.
I think it's also important to think of so the data and the reason why we track it is to also be able to assess over time what types of trends and changes. And so also focusing on things that are sort of in the same groups as each other so that your scope from year to year to year can be similar. And we've added new things in since mid 2014 when Ben started first privately tracking. Ben was one of the original TLs of Project Zero.
And he announced his departure from Project Zero today.
Yes,
good luck and congratulations
sad,
to Ben.
Yes, but congratulations to him. So to keep that scope and also focusing on things that we believe we can put resources into, hopefully making a difference in Zeroday is hard. Because if you think about it, an application that doesn't have a security team behind it or IoT devices that will never do security updates, trying to prevent 0 days on those is a very different problem than trying to make 0 day harder for Chrome and Android and iOS. So yes, our scope is different than maybe, every 0 day on there. There's been some 0 days named as DOS attacks or their DOS vulnerabilities. And so we don't really use those because they're not the same problem and they're generally not used in the same way with the same societal impacts as, 0 days that are coming from commercial surveillance vendors or targeting, Windows machines and enterprises in that respect.
The raw numbers are going up. The first year, I believe in 2020, your tracking had 25 up to 28 in 20, and last year your tracker detected and it's documented a detection and disclosure of 58 in the wild ODs, right? The number is climbing.
Yeah. Yes.
This is not a number this number isn't climbing of how many 0 days actually in the wild. This is how much we've actually detected and disclosed. Are we better at finding them or are they using more? Is the volume so high that it's just bubbling up to the top, or are the tools and people and all these things just better at ferreting out these things?
So I go into more detail in this blog post you referenced, the year in review, but when looking at the data, my perspective in Project Zero's is that it's this uptick from 2020 to 2021 is not solely and can't really be explained by a higher use of 0 days. What it looks like is there's a lot more detection and disclosure. Because while I say we track 0 days used in the wild, we can only track things that we know about. And unfortunately, attackers don't really want to come to me and say, hey, I'm using this 0 day. You haven't caught it yet, but hey, give me credit where credit's due. If they want to, I would love that. But so far, that hasn't been how this is going. And so not only do they have to be found and detected in the wild, which is a hard problem, but then we need the industry to be public about the fact that this isn't just another 0 day vulnerability, say, found by a fuzzer or something like this. There is evidence to support that it is being actively exploited in the wild. And so that's where I think the numbers come from, not the use, but the detection and the public knowledge of them being 0 day. And the reason why I feel somewhat confident saying it's more of this latter part is because even in 2021, it's the first full year that we had Android and Apple actually labeling in their security bulletins that when they had evidence to
Oh,
or
it's
had
terrible
reason to
labeling
believe
though,
that
right?
something.
There is a report that this may have been exploited in the wild. Like some of the phrasing and stuff, it's just anyway, we have to get better at that. That's not a conversation for
I
here.
mean, yes, 100%, but I'm also going to take the win that at
It's
least
better
they're
than
being
nothing.
labeled because we didn't know about all these in previous
Yeah, your own
years.
company
And
does the same
so
thing too. I mean, talk to your Android team as well, because a lot of the times you'll see a Chrome bug or an Android bug coming out of it, and the documentation is so vague you don't even know. And then anyway, that's not a conversation for now. It's clear that we're better at